What up? What up? What up? Happy New Year. Welcome to Mountain West Hoops Insider. We're back for the 2021 edition. Hope you guys had a great break. Eli, what up, my man?
Yeah, happy New Year to you. Hope everything's doing well over there. We got some time away, some valuable time away, but glad to be back talking Mountain West hoops as always.
Yeah, lots of Mountain West Hoops action to cover. Hope everybody's doing well. Looking forward to just diving straight in. So let's talk about the league just in general, some of the things that have happened before we kind of get to specific matchups. Kind of do it like that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, we had our first taste of what this two-game series looks like, and it's produced some really interesting results so far. We've seen the team that won the first game. We've seen them struggle in the second game. We've seen domination in both games, particularly Utah State comes to mind. It's going to be a pretty wild conference schedule. Just this two-game series, and these teams having to, put in their usual travel with the Mountain West being one of those leagues that you might have to play a game in San Diego, then go up and play another one in Fort Collins. It's going to be a treacherous schedule. I don't see many teams, winding up with really good win-loss records in conference play because it's a level playing field. There are no home crowds, so you don't really have that home court advantage, and it's going to be really fun. But we've seen a number of breakout individual performances, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as we go through some of the teams. But it's an intriguing league this season. I think the upper trio there of San Diego State, Boise State, and you might even put Utah State in that category right now. They've been competitive. They've looked really good out of the gates, and we'll see if that second tier in the conference kind of steps up and morphs into that league as well.
Yeah, we talked about Colorado State possibly jumping in. They had a big historic win. Talk about before we get into each team, is it still tiered the same way you think as far as Boise is kind of at the top with San Diego State, and then there's kind of everybody else in the middle tier, and then there's a bottom tier, or has it changed?
I would say it's probably about the same. I would think Boise State, since their opening day loss against Houston, I think they've looked really good. And that Houston game is always going to be a tough one, just because of how well they defend. That was a pretty tough matchup for them. But I think overall the tiers are still roughly the same. We've seen San Diego State drop 2 games now, so that is probably a little bit of a surprise. But they've played a challenging schedule so far,
Yep.
and when they've looked good, they've looked phenomenal. And then that middle tier, you might give a little bit more stock to Utah State, but again, their schedule's been weaker through 4 games than a lot of these other teams that have played 4 games. So we'll see what they do against some of those middle tier, upper tier teams, but they've been off to a pretty good start too.
Right. You mentioned Boise State. I think head coach talked about this may be the best defensive team that he's had. Leon Rice mentioned that this may be the best defensive team he's had, and they've definitely looked good since then. San Diego State is one of their assistants came on, or one of their staff members came on the show earlier this year and talked about, or last year, and talked about this is the toughest schedule they've had since they've been there, and they've proven that they continue to do a high-level job. They're going to not go undefeated maybe like last year we got spoiled, but they definitely look like they are at the top as well, like you said, with Boise. Let's just kind of dive into some of these series. We got a special guest coming on in about 25 minutes, so we'll let him talk a lot about Colorado State and some other aspects of the league. Justin Michael will be joining us, but let's kind of dive into this Fresno State and Wyoming matchup that happened again last night.
Yeah, this was a pretty wild 2-game series. The first one came down to the wire. Wyoming was able to come up with that first victory, and they're still leaning on their backcourt quite a bit. I think their backcourt is one of the stronger ones in the conference. Marcus Williams, who's a freshman who I've talked endlessly about. I think he's going to be the next star in this conference. But the second game was kind of a surprise to me. Fresno State got off to a double-digit lead, and they're able to secure this one. And the main reason for that is Orlando Williams and what he did. He wound up with a double-double of, I believe, 33 points and 13 rebounds. He also had a couple of blocks and steals and just turned it over once. That's as good of a stat line as you could possibly come up with. The sophomore is doing really good things there. And I think that's a really good sign for Fresno State. They kind of struggled at the beginning of the season a little bit. They had that COVID-19 pause. It's not going to be super easy for this team because they are meshing a lot of different things there, these transfers that are coming in. But to get this type of performance from this player, Orlando Williams, is now going to be the leader of your team. He is pretty much the most experienced returning player on this team, and is just a sophomore. I think that's a really good sign for Fresno State as they head into kind of a challenging uphill battle now in Mountain West Conference play.
Yeah, a small correction. Eli doesn't make very many typos or mistakes. Orlando Robinson is actually
right.
Who you're talking about. But yeah, I think we played against him last year, matter of fact, and I saw him on the circuit when I was at UTEP recruiting him, and I thought that was as big of a get as anyone in that class for the conference. Similar to what you talked about with Marcus Williams. Orlando Robinson is now showing he's one of the elite players and probably maybe the most elite front court player arguably in the conference as just a sophomore. So he was 12 of 16 from the field too, had a really efficient game. Good for Fresno State, kind of bouncing back. They had a tough series the weekend before. So glad to see them kind of showing, they've had a tough stretch too. They didn't have as much summer. Coach Felton talked about that. Tarvis Felton, associate head coach, when he came on, they didn't have as much summer. They've been shut down this year, COVID protocol. Early on in the year, didn't have as many games. So they just haven't had as many times out. They're still learning their team. Former player of mine as well, Deion Stroud, who I absolutely love and love to see what he's doing in such a small amount of time. His numbers and his efficiency have been through the roof, and he's a great spark for them at Fresno State as well. So, yeah, talk a little bit more about Fresno State just in general before we kind of talk about Wyoming, who also played in this series.
Yeah, I think, with Fresno, I think that defensively that's going to be the key for them. I think they do have a number of pretty talented scorers on this team. You mentioned Stroud and Robinson, and even looking further down the list, some of these guys like Devin Gage, the DePaul transfer, he's going to be able to put up shots. Anthony Holland as well. I think, we talked about this with Tarvis Felton. This team has a lot of length and a lot of athleticism, and I think initially that probably helps more so on the offensive end, but if they can come together as a collective unit and get that really going and improve defensively, I think that's a team that can kind of sneak up into that middle tier of the conference and be one of those teams that gets better as the season goes along. But as you mentioned, the COVID-19 pause, we spoke with Felton quite a bit about that and what that's been like, and it just sounds like a really challenging situation. So any of these teams that are coming back off that pause or haven't even been able to practice much over the summer, it's just going to take time. And to go from starting the season off playing some non-D1 teams or some of the weaker teams in Division I basketball, and then, having to go right into it and play a team like Wyoming, which has a lot of talent on their roster, and some of these other teams in the league, there's going to be some hiccups. And we just know that. We can anticipate that happening. But I think this is one of the teams that has a pretty high ceiling. If everything gets going, there's a lot of the talent on this roster, and I really like the type of basketball that they play. And for Justin Hudson, we know how defensive oriented he is with his coaching philosophy. If they're able to improve that, I think they could wind up being a pretty competitive team.
Yeah, you mentioned Coach Hudson. One of the great coaches in this Mountain West, which is a great league, and he had enormous success at San Diego State when he was there as an assistant and recruited guys like Kawhi, and he was kind of the defensive mastermind behind some of the things that they were doing there. So, and we know what he did when he first got to Fresno, hitting the ground running his first year as a head coach. So we know what he's capable of. Really good head coach, got a lot of new pieces, figuring it out, but led by a really good sophomore. And I think they're only going to get better the more time that they have. Deion Stroud's also a sophomore. You mentioned some of the other transfers as well, kind of mixing in. I think their Tulsa transfer, who's a Bakersfield.
Isaiah Hill, yeah.
Isaiah Hill's also a sophomore. So a lot of young players that are playing major minutes, major roles, and look for them to continue to get better as it goes and as they continue to build. But that was a big win for them and great strategy to kind of just attack and get the ball inside. I believe they're one of their seniors, 3-year transfer from Salt Lake Junior College, was actually Deshaun Taylor's teammate, nickname. I think they call him Debo, but I think he had 17 and 9, if I'm not mistaken, off the bench, who was also a 4-man, so 4-5. So also just kind of showing their best 2 performers from a stat standpoint really established the inside presence against Wyoming.
Yeah, and I think with Wyoming, the key for them is going to be these types of matchups. I mean, Fresno State has a lot of size. Defending Orlando Robinson is always going to be a challenge. And I think with Wyoming, they're better suited for a perimeter-oriented type game. Marcus Williams can hit from a lot of different spots, and Hunter Maldonado is kind of that wing slasher type guy. But even their bigs, Hunter Thompson, is more so a player who is like a stretch four, and he can hit from the perimeter a lot. So I think my key for them is defending some of these larger, more athletic teams, and to go 1-1 against Fresno State. I think that's probably about what they expected, but I definitely want to see them kind of shore up that interior presence if they want to meet expectations this season.
Yeah, I don't know if any coach ever expects to get this split, even though I think they always go in thinking they're going to win every game, even though they know how hard it is. But no, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about Wyoming real quick. We've talked a little bit about Fresno. You mentioned Wyoming having the guards they have. And real quick, Christian Gray is who I was speaking of that also had a really good game. 17 points, 9 rebounds, who's another forward and interior player for Fresno. But let's talk about Wyoming. They're 7-2 on the year. They've looked really good at times and shown that they really are not a team that's rebuilding in a sense of what it takes sometimes to rebuild, to start all the way from scratch. But they've played really well so far in this season and in conference play to get that 78-74 win against Fresno. The first game on Saturday was a big one. So let's talk a little bit about Wyoming.
Yeah, Wyoming is a team that I really like quite a bit, even despite the Fresno State loss last night. They've gotten off to a really good start this season, and I think at points they've shown some really good flashes and moments of being a cohesive unit and a much better team than we saw last season under Allen Edwards. But I think with them, consistency is going to be a key factor. We can always go back to the Texas Southern game, have a 21-point lead at home, I believe, and they weren't able to hang on to that one. That's going to be something to monitor. And I think also it's kind of some of these starts where they fall behind early and have to play some catch up. I think that could be something that is something to monitor as the season goes along. But it's a team that is kind of similar to Fresno State in the sense that they are dealing with a lot of these new players. Wyoming more so with JUCO and freshmen as opposed to transfers like Fresno State. But I like how this team is set up. I will continue to say that I'm glad Jeff Linder was able to bring back that key trio that they have with Hunter Thompson, Hunter Maldonado, and with Quan Marble. I think that's a really nice setup there. And now bringing in Marcus Williams, who we really like at the point guard slot. He's been, I think, the runaway freshman of the year so far in this conference. It's a team that's going to compete no matter what. They can shoot the ball, they take care of the basketball, but I think a lot like Fresno State, they're going to have to defend and make key defensive stops if they're going to win some of these close games.
Yeah, really good offensive team, and the fact that they really shoot the basketball, shooting 38% from three as a team, which is extremely impressive. I think they have 4 guys shooting over 40%, and then scoring wise, I mean they have. Marcus is averaging 17. Hunter Maldonado is averaging 15. Kenny Thompson's averaging right at 11. And then you have Hunter Thompson's right at almost 10, 9.8. And then you have Jeffries, Marble are both averaging 9. So, I mean, you have almost 6. What is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys pretty much right at double figures. So being able to score the basketball, I don't think will be a problem for them. They're averaging 82 a game, which is incredible for a first-year program. And you talked about Marcus Williams. He's just been unbelievable for a freshman to play at the level he's played. 37 assists, 21 turnovers only on the year. So he's not turning the ball over very much, but he's shooting 49% from the field as a freshman playing 32 minutes a game. So absolutely love Marcus Williams and just love what Coach Linder and his staff have been able to do in year one. Year one is probably the hardest year to establish culture, get buy-in, have enough, you get these jobs so late in the year. Sometimes it's hard to have an opportunity to recruit the players you really want to build around. And obviously he did a tremendous job at Northern Colorado. So I've been really impressed with Wyoming so far. I'm not surprised because I know Coach Linder and Coach DeWeese and that staff and what they're about and what success that they've had everywhere they've been. But I also it's hard to do. Mount West is a high level of play. So for them to be off to such a great start is definitely impressive so far, because I think most people picked them at the bottom, right, wrong, and different. They weren't expecting some of these freshmen like Marcus Williams to come in and average about 18 a game and lead a team. So, talk a little bit more about what you see with them going forward before we switch to our next team.
Yeah, I think you hit it right there. It's just impressive for a first-year coach to do this, let alone in a year where we're dealing with COVID-19. And I think a lot of these players who came to campus probably didn't really know what to expect when they got there, but they've performed well. I think they have a lot of guys on this team who are potential breakout guys. Drake Jeffries, who's come on and really performed well. Some of these other guys on their team, Kenny Foster's played really well as well after the last season. He kind of came on late and has kind of carried that into this year. So I like Wyoming. It's a team that I spoke about as a possible breakout team heading into the season. And I think, as you mentioned, we're able to shoot 38% from deep as a team, and you take care of the basketball, which has always been kind of a Jeff Linder motto, is to take care of the basketball and shoot well from the perimeter. I think that always gives you a chance, especially at home. And once we're past COVID-19 and fans are back in the stands, Arena Auditorium is going to be a really challenging place to play. It always is. And when a team is able to hit from the perimeter at elevation like that, that's going to be the perfect recipe to pick up some of these home upset wins.
Right, absolutely. And you talked about this too, and we'll see a lot of this at all levels of college basketball. This back-to-back home swing and road swing, playing the same team in less than 24 hours most of the time, or in 48 hours, really challenging to you just never know what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of lopsided, because even from a motivation standpoint, human nature says if you win by 25 one game, it's going to be hard to come back and play the same team. And that's competitive and really good players so you're going to see a lot of, we've seen it already at all levels and all conferences. It'll be no different in this league with a lot of good players and a lot of good coaches. We'll see a lot of splits, to say the least. We have a guest coming on in about 10-ish minutes. So let's talk about San Diego State a little bit. They played Colorado State. We'll kind of dive into that and then bring on our guest. We'll talk about that when our guest comes on. Let's pick another series we want to talk about before he does.
Okay. Yeah, I'll run with the Boise State San Jose State series, because this kind of tags along with what you're talking about in the 2-game series.
Exactly.
Man, yep. I don't think you could possibly find a series as crazy as this one. A reminder, these games were being played in, I believe it was like the Fit 360 complex, or Ability 360 complex in Phoenix, kind of like a small fitness facility. Just a pretty bizarre situation all around. And San Jose State's been forced into this because of COVID-19 issues. But first game, Boise State just absolutely dominated. They led by, I believe, as many as like 55 points, which is almost unheard of in a conference game, let alone one in this conference. And Boise State wound up winning 106-54. They had, I believe, 6 players finish in double figures. Derek Alston was phenomenal, and it was just really easy going for this team. And in the second game, and mind you, it's also worth noting here that Seneca Knight, who I believe was San Jose State's leading scorer, if not the second to Richard Washington last season, he announced that he opted out of the season and is now in the transfer portal. So that's a hit for San Jose State, obviously, a high usage guy who has a lot of talent and was an all-league player last season. But the way that San Jose State answered in the second game was super impressive to me. They were able to battle throughout this game. They had a chance to win it down the stretch, wound up losing 87-86. But, to lead this game with 13 minutes to play after losing and trailing by 50-plus points throughout much of the game just 48 hours before, I think it really speaks to the resilience of this team and this coaching staff and the guys who are still there to get blown out the way that they did, to lose what is probably your best player, and to respond against a Boise State team that could be a legitimate top 25, top 30 team in the country. I think that's really impressive for San Jose State. So I appreciate that fight that they gave. Just a good performance all around, even though it didn't end up in the win column. Just a fight like that, I think it's really impressive for San Jose State.
Yeah, I don't think many people expected them to play. Again, you talked about Boise, and we talked about Boise at the beginning of the show, and we have all year long about them being one of the top teams in this conference. Looks like they can be an NCAA tournament team. So San Jose's had a tough stretch too of just not being able to play games. I mean, they didn't play their first game until 2-3 weeks into the season after everyone else. So for them to be able to play and compete at that level and kind of like that, you said that it probably took them back to playing open gym back in the day,
Yeah.
playing at that rec center, just getting a hoop a little bit. But yeah, credit to Coach Prelo and what he continues to do to just keep his team fighting. I know it's got to be challenging to keep overcoming obstacles. You mentioned a young man going to the transfer portal, not being able to play games. It's hard enough as it is just to win a game. So for him to continue to keep his team bought in against one of the best and fighting, not surprised at all with his leadership. But yeah, you talked about San Jose State. Talk a little bit about Boise and what you saw from them and what you were impressed with and what you like about this team.
Yeah, there's a lot to take away from these two games, and I guess it starts with Derek Alston, who's probably been the player of the year in the conference so far, consistently averaging around 20 or so points per game, and he's performed really well. He's come up in big spots, but I think the thing that's been most impressive for me about him is his efficiency numbers dropped quite a bit this past season, and I think a lot of that was due to just having to take on a bigger workload. And even though he had Justinian and Jessup along his side, Boise State really counted on him to make a lot of big baskets, and sometimes that comes up short. But I think with the overall talent and some of the supporting cast on this team this season, he's in a much better spot to still put up good numbers, but do it in a more efficient fashion. And I'm sure you can attest to this one. Coaching staffs are all about efficiency, getting as many points down the court as many times as you can. So that's been a really good sign for them. But I think overall, it's the second game of this Boise State San Jose State series was impressive for the Spartans, but I think the same can be said for Boise State. And the reason for that is because if you're fighting for an at-large bid and you're in a situation where you need to come up with a victory, I mean, that's the selection committee is if Boise State wound up losing that game, I mean that is a real challenge for a mid-major team to drop a game to I think San Jose State somewhere around 300 in the net rankings. That's kind of a do or die situation. You have to come up with that win, and I think a lot of the players on this team showed up defensively down the stretch. Abu Kijab is a guy who I really like, who is more of a defensive presence right now,
Right.
but he does a lot of great things locking down guys. Ray J. Dennis has been getting a lot of steals on the season. He's been one of the most improved players in the conference. But I think coming up with that victory, it's a lot like what happened last year with San Diego State in one of their first conference games of the year. San Jose State, again, had a chance to beat them late in the game. I think coming up with that victory and just, having that sigh of relief that you're able to scratch out that victory and move on, that's a really big deal for Boise State, because from now on, it's going to be all about surviving for 40 minutes, getting the wins that are necessary to pick up an at-large bid. So I think that's it's a good series for them to get that really dominant win and coming up in clutch in the second one.
Yeah, for sure. And, just kind of looking at their roster, you talked about Jessup. I mean, to lose a guy to the NBA and then still have one of your, have a team that can compete to go to the NCAA tournament says a lot about Coach Rice, his staff and their program. And Derek Alston did not get out of the gate playing great basketball. I mean, we talked about it early on. They played against Houston, which we see how good Houston is now. And we thought that even then, but he didn't play very well out of the gate. I don't even know if he scored in that game. And now for him to be averaging right at 18 a game is showing his ability. And everyone thought he would be a first-team all-conference guy and a potential guy who could get drafted like Jessup did. He's shooting 43% from three. So he's starting to play at a high level, and now it makes everyone else be able to kind of fill in the gaps. You talk about Marcus Shaver is also, playing at a high level. And has scored the ball really well in double figures. Ray Dennis, they have multiple guys that are scoring in double figures. And then you have the Arizona transfer and Emmanuel Akai, who's right at double figures, not quite there, but they have a deep team. Coach's son, Max Rice, you talked about, I think last show and his ability to be able to shoot the ball. He's shooting 43% and kind of taking that Jessup role a little bit. And this team looks to be deep. They look like they can definitely score, and credit to them for kind of getting it turned to where, again, a lot of guys who hadn't played and sat out, and, you have all these talented guys you're trying to mesh together. And again, Coach Rice has talked about them being a really good defensive team. They're holding opponents under 40% at 37.5 a game, which when a Leon Rice team defends at that high of a level, they normally don't have too much trouble scoring. But when you can score the way that they've been able to score the ball, and you can defend and and shoot the three, they're not quite as good as Wyoming from three at 38, but they're right at 34. So when you can score and shoot the ball and defend and have a lot of versatility, this Boise State team looks like one of the better ones he's had since he's been there.
Yeah, it's a really impressive team on both sides of the ball. I think they, as you mentioned, they defend really well. They contest shots. It's probably not their best defensive rebounding team because they've had just superb defensive rebounding teams in the past. But Mon Armis is still holding things down. The East Tennessee State transfer in the post, he's been really good.
And but when he was at East Tennessee, just to jump in, he was one of the leading rebounders in the country. So keep going.
Yeah, so they'll be fine in that aspect, but I think the emergence of Max Rice is just mind-boggling to me in the sense that you have all these previews written about Boise State heading into the season, and they will all mention, Derek Alston, they'll mention the transfers, they'll mention Ray J. Dennis as a breakout guy. I don't think anyone had Max Rice on their radar as a knockdown shooter or a guy who was getting these kinds of minutes. And that just speaks to
a guy who could average 10 a game at this level.
Coach's son is really showing up this season, and it's been good to see, and it only helps Boise State's depth when you're going to get into some cases where you might have a couple guys out, you might have some guys in foul trouble. To have that added depth there, and they still haven't even added Devonair Dutrieve, another Pac-12 transfer. He's kind of status is to be determined right now, so they're only getting stronger, and I think these past couple of performances really speak to what Boise State is right now.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about our guest, much anticipated. We'd like to be able to show some love and just bring different perspectives to the show, whether it's coaches. We've had assistant coaches on from different teams within the league, and we've had Jeff Grammer from New Mexico who covers the Lobos and also some New Mexico State. And now we have our Colorado State local media expert. So we'll get with him in just a second after a quick commercial. I want to take time to acknowledge one of our partners, Rising Coaches. Every coach wants to rise in their career in one way or another. We're all looking for professional development, access to tools, and relationships that can help us grow and help us advance in our career. Rising Coaches provides just that. You can visit Rising Coaches at www.risingcoaches.com. Their memberships are just $10 a month and provides a genuine community to help you grow and advance in your career. Well, we got our guest here, Justin Michael, representing. How you doing, Jay?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. Anytime I get to be mentioned in the same sentence as Jeff Grammer, that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's a big deal for all of us. It was a big deal when he came on, and we definitely appreciate we got to show the Mountain West love, man, versatility. But he's definitely the veteran of the Mountain West as far as media, and I believe he's an AP voter, top 25 voter, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So, Jeff Grammer, shout out to him. And if you don't follow him on Twitter, you're just missing out because he's as entertaining as anyone. He talked about some of the things with his daughter. I'm looking forward to seeing what he may bring this year. But I know you and Eli have kind of talked a little bit on your end and had an article and different things come out. But let's talk about Colorado State, a historic win. I'll lead at that and then let Eli kind of take over. But obviously they played a series. They weren't able to win yesterday. They had a starter out due to family emergency, so that probably had he averages 10 a game, so that probably affected him some. But let's talk about the historic win first and how magical that was and what you saw from Colorado State there.
Yeah, man. I mean, to come back from 26 points is just it's insane. I mean, to go down that much at Viejas normally is a death sentence. I mean, if you go down 15-20, anybody that follows the Mountain West knows how hard it is to play there. Obviously, not having fans, that's probably a factor to an extent. You don't have them breathing down your neck. It's not as hostile. You don't have the show, all that stuff. But, man, just the fight that this team has. I mean, no seniors on the roster. They're dead in the water. and they just kept fighting back. And to me, that's probably what makes this team the most dangerous. It's just that they never give in. They have the athleticism, they have the versatility, but they have the right mindset to compete and to win. And that's kind of something that had been missing from CSU for a couple of years. They've, been talented guys throughout the stretch, but now they kind of have the right mentality, and now they have that program defining win. Now they have to, build off of it. But as Eli and I talked about on my podcast the other night, it kind of reminded me of that dramatic Nevada comeback win down at the pit a couple of years ago. They were able to build off that, really, turn into that Nevada dynasty that we all got to see. And, obviously people in Fort Collins are hoping that CSU can do something similarly.
Well, I think one thing from coaching this league and coaching against that Nevada team that you spoke about when I was at Fresno, and one thing I love about this Colorado State team is, so much staff continuity, but, with the players, you don't have any seniors really, so you lose Nico, who was a huge factor. They're playing a different way a little bit without him, but to have your best two players as sophomores, then you have two guys who play major minutes as juniors who essentially could be seniors because of how many minutes they've played, and you're going to have everybody back, essentially, all things going according to what you hope they do. You have everybody back, so you're able to continue to build. And we talked about this on the show a lot. The teams that have been good this year are the teams that have a bunch of returners, and they have that continuity and have a lot to build around. So Colorado State proving that they can beat a NCAA tournament level team. We saw it from trying to think from San Diego State. Matter of fact, the year that Nevada was really good, Nevada was probably going to get in no matter what, so it was the beginning of Mountain West coming back to being a 2-bid league, right? Because then San Diego State beats Nevada, and then San Diego State gets in. Nevada was getting in no matter what. And San Diego State's kind of getting to that point like Nevada did, where they're going to be in almost no matter what. So can somebody else win the tournament? So there's 2 bids. So Colorado State kind of proven that they have the firepower and the ability to beat the best in the league. Just talk a little bit about what you see in the youth of this roster as they keep getting better and playing together, and then I'll let Eli take it over.
Yeah, I mean, because of the youth that they have, it's going to be a little bit up and down at times. They're especially raw in the post. They've got really young guys. Deshaun Thomas, only a sophomore, a guy that came off the bench last year, kind of getting baptized by fire in these early matchups with, San Diego State. And even, Santa Clara had some big guys, Orlando Robinson at Fresno State, just a lot of really tough draws right off the bat. Last night, they actually flipped it, went with James Moores, another young guy, redshirt freshman. But you can just kind of see at times that, they're still trying to figure it out, but the skill is there. You mentioned they've got sophomores, juniors, no seniors. These are guys that they're playing a lot of valuable minutes together. And come March, I think that's really going to pay off. You knew what you had in guys like, David Roddy, Isaiah Stevens. They proved it last year. They're taking it to a new level this year. What we've seen from, James Moores in the post, what he's been able to bring scoring, that's, really intriguing to me because they have, young guys that are actually going to be able to contribute. Now, they're going to have to figure it out defensively, because we've seen them kind of get eaten alive in the post by some of these bigger guys at times. But in that win, David Roddy just kind of slid over to the 5 and ended up being the big guy in that. And they were able to adjust and go small. So it's just interesting. They have a lot of flexibility, a lot of young guys. John Tonje, a sophomore, came in and hit the biggest shot of the game. They've got Isaiah Rivera, true freshman out of Illinois, a guy who I think is going to be really special. Last night, another really tough draw. It's just one of those things where it's like, first career start on the road at Viejas. Good luck, kid. But it's just going to be so valuable, come March, come spring. I probably sound like a coach right now, giving some cliches, but that's just kind of what it's about.
And with Rivera and Moores, they both got quite a bit of looks last night, with Moores getting the start there. Not necessarily known commodities in this conference yet. But what have you seen out of them so far that you like? I just, from my perspective, I thought, you mentioned it. There was first big minutes at Viejas, and against a guy like Nathan Mensah. That's not an easy task at all. But I thought they competed pretty well, and they made some good hustle plays. So I'm just kind of curious what you see out of both of them, maybe in their repertoire, and what you saw from them last night.
Well, with Isaiah especially, I'm really high on his basketball IQ. You can just see that he gets it. He's not lost out there defensively. He's making switches. He's, playing aggressive on-ball defense. He's doing everything that he can to earn those minutes. He's not, coming out and trying to do too much. He's just playing within the game. So many times with guys, when they're coming from high school, they were the big man, average. He scored 30 plus points a game pretty frequently in high school. Like, he was the dude. Now he has to come to CSU and, just kind of be a role guy. And I wondered, is he going to come in and, jack up a bunch of shots, try and do too much? He hasn't done any of that. He's played within it, made smart passes, playing good defense. And you just see him kind of figuring it out, taking his lumps. He's aggressive when he wants to be. He's not scared to be. He's put the ball on the floor a couple of times. He did actually get a charge last night where he kind of went to the rim kind of recklessly. But another one, he hit just a gorgeous corner three where, the jump shot was it was so pure. His release looked so good. And you could just think about as soon as he figures this out, he does that a couple of times a night. Coming off the bench, that's going to be lethal. You already got Tanjay, who's putting up big points. And then, James Moore's, like I said, he's kind of raw defensively, still figuring it out. But he's really just got a lot of skill. He's a good passer. He can shoot. I like that he can put the ball on the floor and go to the rim. He did that 2 or 3 times last night where he got the ball at the top of the key, just put it on the floor and went straight to the rim and was able to finish. That not everybody that's 6'10" can just drive and then have the touch to finish over an aggressive San Diego State defense. So I'm really intrigued by their versatility, their high basketball IQ, and then just the unselfishness, not trying to do too much.
Yeah, we spoke about that a little bit on your show the other night, and one of the main things for me in previewing Colorado State this year was, of course, what are things going to look like without Nico Carvacho? And I think we've seen a little bit about that, especially now with more of the questions being on the interior side. But I think overall, I'd like to get your takes on just how this team is kind of different. I know that their tempo is up quite a bit. Defensively, they've been a lot better than expected. So I'm just kind of curious, maybe what are the ins and outs of that kind of coming into fruition for this team?
Yeah, without Nico, I'd say it benefits them offensively, just in the sense that they can play faster. I think Deshaun Thomas and James Moores are both a little more versatile than Nico. He's a guy who I got to cover for 5 years, so I love him to death. Great program leader, but he wasn't that skilled offensively, and it kind of hurt them at times. He traveled a lot in the post. It opens things up with these other guys. They're playing faster. They get out in transition. Excuse me. The counter, though, is now they lack the rebounding a little bit. And when one of your greatest strengths is attacking in transition, rebounding is a big part of that. Obviously, defending and getting stops is too. But, I just kind of wondered, how are they going to be able to adjust? It's really going to take a group effort. It can't be, the one guy getting 12 a game. It's just not going to work. David Roddy's definitely been the guy that handles it the most, but we've seen a good group effort. Kendall Moore's been rebounding. Isaiah Stevens, the guards are crashing. People are boxing out. I'd like to see Adam Thistlewood get a little bit more active on the glass, but he's just been really improved defensively. And as a whole, I just think the defense, it's been much better than I thought it would be coming in. And I think, same thing. They're going to be a good offensive team down the stretch. The fact that we're seeing the defense now, that's what's encouraging to me.
Yeah, and again, you got everybody kind of coming back, and you're building that cohesion. You have a lot of freshmen you leaned on last year. Now they're sophomores, still young, and you don't get to play scrimmage season. You don't get to play exhibition season. They're still, and they missed the first week or so, week and a half of the season too. So it just takes time to continue to build. But I just love the fact that Colorado State, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, extended Coach Medvedev to a contract.
He did, yeah.
So he'll be there. There's stability there. The staff has stability. They're tremendous. And now the players are going to have that same kind of I think that's how you build something special. And you talked about it, having that signature win, to know you have the ability to do it. And let's be honest, they didn't play great in the game. So you didn't play your best game, especially offensively, but you were able to still show you have some fight and that competitive edge. And Coach JR was on the show earlier, and he talked about how competitive this group is. Ali was on a podcast that I did a while back with Coach's Corner this summer. He talked about the team being gym rats. And I think, with the transfer portal the way it is, I believe they'll have great cohesion and all these guys back. But I believe they may even be able to add another piece to this group to maybe shore up some of their deficiencies or some of their weaknesses. So look forward to seeing what they do. Talk about the sophomores real quick. Obviously, a two-headed monster, Isaiah Stevens. I recruited. He made the right decision on where he went to school. I was at UTEP and recruited him, but I was able to know his family, coached his brother some, Barrington Stevens, who now works with Tyler Relf in Dallas and does some tremendous things. But talk about David Rowdy, talk about Isaiah Stevens, talk about the progression and jump that they've already made to show they can lead a Mountain West club.
Yeah, I mean, Isaiah Stevens, I think going into last year, he played with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I mean, he was a guy that people that really followed him knew he was going to be special. I mean, you could just see what he did in high school, a winner, a guy that played really well at the highest level in Texas, which is significant. But David Rowdy was kind of the guy that got all of the attention from the fans. You know, when he took his visit to campus, it was, you know, highly anticipated, had the Big Ten offers, you know, it was all about Roddy. So when Isaiah Stevens kind of stole the show, everyone was like, all right, like, this kid's legit. And then he just like never let the expectation down. It was incredible. I mean, from day one, he was a guy that's just come in and played like a veteran. And we're seeing it. I mean, again, even in that game against San Diego State last night, he didn't really have a shot. He had some turnovers. I think he had 4 in the game, led the team. He ended up finishing 1 rebound shy of a triple-double because that's just the type of guy he is. 11 points, 10 boards, 9 assists. 10 assists, 9 rebounds. To play with that mentality at that age, it's just special. And, you know, like David Roddy, it's the same deal. He's a guy that he plays like a veteran. We saw him going up against Matt Mitchell. He's out there driving on him, bodying him, throwing him around. These guys, they're not scared of anyone. They're not afraid of the moment. I mean, Isaiah Stevens, he's hit big shots, but he's unselfish. You know, I keep, you know, making some of the same points, but just look at that game-winning situation. Stevens has the ball. He could have put it on the floor, tried to draw a foul. Everyone, you know, they would have understood it. Instead, he dishes it out to Tanjay, trusts him, lets that guy knock down the shot. I just love these dudes. They're special. They're talented, and they just get it. You know, it's not all about them. And in an era of, like, you know, people that play one season of college basketball and care more about their Twitter highlights than anything else, it's refreshing.
Right, and I think you know, I could talk about Isaiah Stevens a bunch. I don't know David Roddy as well. Just watched him and kind of listening to what the coaches say about him, and they rave about him. But both of them just selfless winners. You know, guys that are competitors,
Totally.
guys that are winners. Isaiah Stevens won a state championship in Texas when he was an underclassman and really wasn't on the radar. But that was when he started to become a guy that was on the radar. But always with even in Texas, an underappreciated guy because he's not flashy. He's not he doesn't have the highlight mixtapes that maybe some of the other guys have. But what he's always had is great speed, great ball control, and an ability. I remember he played on a non-shoe circuit team as an underclassman too. And so, of course, knowing his brother and having worked with his brother, I'm tracking him, watching him like, man, he's got some elite speed. He's got some ability to make plays. He's unselfish. And he made the jump and then kind of got on one of the shoe circuit teams. But even on that team, you had a Baylor signee. You had, you know, these other higher level guys. I want to say Greg Brown was on that team, the freshman sensation from Texas, played on that team as well. And so he was one of those guys that still wasn't super appreciated. You know, he had kind of a Mississippi State offer, might have been his highest level offer, but it was kind of one of those that even that offer for that league is not as attractive as some of the other ones. So he never was really in the hype of even in his own state. So I think he's always carried a pretty big chip on his shoulder. I think Coach Ali, you know, in the staff did a tremendous job recruiting him. Ali does a great job recruiting Texas, and Ali's transferred a little bit of his chip that he had when he played to Isaiah as well and show him the ropes. But I'll let Eli kind of close it out. You got to tell us a funny story before you go, though, too.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess before we get into that, you kind of mentioned, or we just kind of had a short discussion about the different recruiting offers and where these guys come from and stuff. One of the things that I thought is, you know, particularly interesting in the Mountain West, most of these guys that are coming out of the region will be transfers. We see that a lot, especially in this league, a lot of transfers. But Nico Medved kind of has this footprint in the Midwest region. You know, coming from Minnesota, he's got a lot of those ties back to when he was at Drake and Furman. And I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, if you can speak on this, if you have any details on that. Do you see that, Midwest footprint that he has being any sort of advantage towards, compared to the rest of the league? Because I know a lot of these other coaches are probably going to mostly get guys out of California or out of the Rocky Mountain region. But I think to have that footprint that he has in the Midwest, I think could be a really big deal, because a lot of those guys that are coming out of that region are especially skilled.
I think that's a great point. And I mean, ultimately, you want to be able to recruit well everywhere. I mean, California, locally, I mean, look at Justinian Jessup is from right down the road, a guy that Larry Stacey didn't even bother to recruit. And that's a sore subject that CSU fans will forever complain about, and as they should. I mean, the dude was a killer. But yeah, the Midwest connection, man, it's big with this staff. Nico Medved, he's a Minnesota guy. He has the strong roots. But I think another big part of that is actually Dave Thorson. And that's Nico Medved's right-hand man. He was a long-time head coach at the high school level in Minnesota, maybe the greatest high school coach of all time in Minnesota. And that's not even hyperbole. This is a guy that has coached all kinds of D1 players, has had plenty of opportunities, decided to go with Nico Medved to Drake, followed him over to CSU. His roots, I mean, that was a big reason they were able to pull David Roddy. He had offers from Minnesota. He could have gone to Northwestern. They were able to bring him out. And same deal. I mean, Kendall Moore's from Illinois. Isaiah Rivera's from Illinois. These are talented guys that I'm not sure would have considered CSU under previous circumstances. And so to me, I mean, yeah, that's all about it. Go get those Midwest dudes. If you can get dudes like David Roddy that come in at 18 years old and can bench press a Mack truck, sign me up, man. These dudes are different.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one final question for you before we get into the last bit. I think my vision of the perfect season for Colorado State, or at least a perfect realistic kind of outlook for this team, in my eyes, is probably finishing somewhere around top 3, top 4 in the conference, and then going down in Vegas and winning 3 games there and clinching the league's automatic bid. So I think that's a realistic goal for this team. But I'm curious on your end, if we get to March, that first week of March, and Colorado State sitting as the, say, number 3 seed, what do you think their factors will be, and what do you think the difference will be, whether or not they can win those 3 games in Vegas and clinch the Mountain West tournament?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they gotta keep defending at a high level. I think they actually need to defend better in some circumstances, especially the paint. They're gonna have to rebound at a high level. They don't have a ton of size. That's something I've talked about a couple of times. They got to get off to a faster start offensively. I mean, I think they're going to be a good offensive team, but it's just kind of worrisome now. It's been a big factor in all of their big games so far. They keep burying themselves in these holes. And, yeah, it was great that you were able to come back from, 26 points and win. Yes, it's great that you were able to make it a game in the second game at Viejas. But at some point, if you go down to big teams, they're going to bury you. I mean, you guys spent a lot of time talking about how good Boise State is defensively. I wouldn't want to go down double digits to them. I mean, they can shoot the hell out of the ball. They defend all over the place. Utah State, another team I wouldn't want to go down to. They don't worry me quite as much from a jump shooting perspective, but still, eventually, good teams, if they go up on you, they're going to bury you, and that's going to be a problem. That said, it's tough for me to panic that much because I really do think the offense has been good for CSU. I mean, especially in that game last night, they missed a ton of early open looks where, the shots, they were uncontested, they were in rhythm, they were coming off of a pass. I mean, Coach Burton, he can chime in a little bit on this. I don't think you can be that upset. I have all these fans in my mentions, they got to change things, they got to do it, something different. I mean, good shots are good shots. If you're a coach, oftentimes some of the best looks you're going to get are in the first 12 seconds of a possession, especially against a great defense like San Diego State. You can't really kill a team for getting open looks in rhythm from good shooters, can you?
No, I think Coach Medvedev does such a good job. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's done it at Furman, he's done it at Drake, and now he's doing it here. So I think fans are always going to kind of have a way of reacting, right? And coaches have a way of saying, okay, we're down 26. Fans probably going one way, but now fans are like, historic win, we're celebrating. They don't necessarily know the process that goes into making that product what it is. They didn't know Isaiah Stevens, like you just talked about, and David Roddy were going to do what they're doing. So I think the coaches always kind of have their plan and their formula for success, and the fans are always going to kind of react on the highs and lows, So I think more than anything, be glad that you have the coach that you do. The last staff did a really good job. Stacy, I know the staff well, Leonard Perry, Ross Hodge, Coach Medvedev was on the staff with them, but they went more the transfer and older guy route, and went more the JUCO route, whereas Coach Medvedev is getting a lot of 4-year guys, which gives you stability year in and year out. You know what you're going to get. You have continuity. So I think if you're getting those open looks, they like to play fast. Again, Coach Ali kind of came on a podcast and broke down how they play offensively. For those that are interested in that, you can find that on our YouTube channel. But, I think you got to stick to who you are, stick to your identity, and whether you win that way, lose that way, you don't change just because of – now, matchup-wise, you change and make your adjustments, but you don't change your overall identity just because of any of that. Well, I'll let Eli get the last one. I know he had a comment, and then he had also wanted to get our funny question in.
Yeah, so, I know the assistant coaching staff there at Colorado State pretty well. I think they all do a really good job, and they have plenty of accolades there. If you're able to speak on the staff as a whole, and also in particular J.R. Blunt, who's been on this show before just a couple weeks back, and I know he's a really well-credentialed guy who's also from the Midwest and is named one of the top 5 assistants in this conference, and shows a lot of promise. So just what are your thoughts overall on the staff and what they've done, and maybe shine some light on the assistants on the staff as well?
Yeah, we were just talking about the Midwest, and I shouted out Dave Thorson. Should have shouted out J.R. Blunt as well. He's a big reason they were able to get Isaiah Rivera out in Fort Collins. Another terrific recruiter, just a great people person. That's kind of the theme with this staff. They're good dudes. You would want to play for them, I think, and they're genuine. They don't try to sell you on any BS that, let's be real, that's a big part of the recruiting game sometimes, just trying to sell people on unrealistic things, but they're big on, hey, we want to identify top talent that's actually going to fit within what we do. We want to get talented guys, but the right guys. And they've been able to do that. They've been able to identify those guys, establish the relationships. And then, once they get on campus, they're so dedicated. They coach them up. I don't want to take any shots at, any, previous coaches or anything like that. But we just see the difference with this, with these assistants and the impact that it's had on, a guy like Kendall Moore, whose jump shot has just improved tremendously over the last couple of years. He's not a big dude, but he's always been, a good effort dude. But he's been able to kind of refine his skills a little bit. And, JR is a big part of that. Same with Ali, great shooting coach. It's not really a situation where it's like, JR only works a little bit on this, and then, Ali does jump shots. They all kind of do a little bit of everything. But having assistants like that and keeping the continuity, if CSU ends up making, the tournament this year or next year, yes, give Nico Medved all the praise. But those assistants, man, you're not doing any of this without them. You're not signing guys like Isaiah Stevens and David Rowdy. You're not developing them at the same rate.
Right.
Honestly, these guys are going to be head coaches someday. And honestly, I just hope CSU gets to make a run before it happens.
Yeah, no, well said. And Coach Nico was an assistant in the same shoes, and now he is the head coach at Colorado State. So, yeah, definitely those guys have the same kind of capability to do the same. I'm biased towards those guys. I'm biased towards almost everybody in the Mountain West because I feel like I have some pretty big ties to all of them, but I live right down the street from Colorado State here in Loveland, and able to just, get to know those guys even better on a personal level. And they're as good as it gets. It competed against them to recruit guys like Isaiah Stevens, and they won. So I got to see how good they are there too. And then, Fresno is obviously a place that's near and dear to my heart from working there. So end with a funny story, man. You've seen a lot of stuff. Tell us a funny story on that side of the lines. We've talked to coaches about behind the scenes, all access, so to speak, with programs and funny stories there. What's a funny story on the media side that you can share with us?
Yeah, man. It's just been an interesting ride covering this team in general, because when Nico Medved came in, it was a situation where, you had, kind of a lot of turmoil. The end of the Stacy era was, really just, they had an investigation and this whole deal, players transferring out. You had guys from the old era that kind of quit on him. And it's just one of those things where it's like, man, like, is he going to be able to pull this out? And I just kind of wondered, like, is he going to let us be around for all of this? Just let us see like what's going on. A lot of coaches, especially early in their, they want to look good. I get it. It's all about the optics.
Yep.
But Medved, man, he's been all about transparency, and he lets us, not this year, obviously because of COVID, but they let us come to practice. Everything's completely open. We're watching. And 2 years ago, they're running a drill in practice, and I'm taking pictures, and I'm just, kind of not paying attention. I'm in my own deal here. And all of a sudden I like look up, Nico Medved, he's like standing right next to me, and he's just going off on the players for not, playing hard enough. It's, BS, it's not enough effort. And he's like, Justin's giving more effort than you guys are right now. I just like look up and I'm like, oh God, it's like now the players are going to hate me. They're not going to want me at practice anymore. It's like, I'm sorry, like guys, my bad. Like I'm just going to go out of there. Like, that's what makes being around this team so great, man. They're good dudes. Like if you see them in the airport, they're going to come sit next to you. They're going to have a conversation. They ask about your family. It's a fun atmosphere covering this team.
I thought you were going to say you got hit with a ball because you were looking and taking your pictures, but that's where it was even better.
Too.
Well, thanks so much, Justin, man. We really appreciate you coming on. Love the work you're doing, and you're a friend of ours here at All Access, so whatever we can do to support. But keep up the great work, man, behind the scenes. We know it's not easy, and love the background, too. You have to tell us about that next time, what you got going on there. Got some throwback flags and things like that, memorabilia. Love that. But stay safe, man. Happy New Year, and thanks so much. Happy
New Year, guys. Thanks for having me on. Anytime you guys want me to come on to talk hoops, I'm down. Love what you guys are doing. We need more Mountain West love. I mean, we all know it. It doesn't get the attention that it deserves. A lot of good basketball happening in this league.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man.
Thanks, Justin. We appreciate it, man.
So Justin Michael there, representing Colorado State, gave some good nuggets, good insight. Again, another one of the guys that, you get to see the ink or the tweets out there, but guys like him and you and Kevin Sweeney, and it's good to see the face and be able to interview these guys to be able to talk some too. So I'll let you kind of wrap up, Justin, before we go to our next team.
Yeah, it was fun to go kind of behind the scenes from the media perspective on CSU, and it's a program that's doing a lot of really good things. And we've seen a lot of the Mountain West programs who have had, their challenging years. I think the last couple of years with you, Stacy, were challenging, even though that team did compete for the Mountain West title a couple seasons. But it's just been a really refreshing kind of change of scenery there in Fort Collins. Nico Medved's well respected by everyone who he approaches, and the same can be said for their staff. Everyone always likes to talk about Ali Frokmanesh and what he did at Northern Iowa, particularly the Kansas shot, of course, but just a really great staff. Dave Thorson, J.R. Blunt, a lot of these guys on the staff just do phenomenal work, and it shows up too. I mean, you pick off some of these guys from the Midwest who might be unheralded, as we spoke about, taking guys out of Texas or Minnesota or Illinois and turning them into legitimate all-conference players. That says a lot about the individuals, but it says a lot about the coaching staff as well and what they've been able to accomplish. So, there's going to be hiccups along the way. I think last night was a bit of a reality check. You're not always going to come back from 26. San Diego State's going to be tough. That was going to be a challenging matchup no matter what. But I think the future is really bright for this Rams team, and we could wind up seeing them as a really good factor, a really good team once we get to March and have that Mountain West tournament.
Yeah, and similar to what Coach Linder is working to do, and different coaches within the league. Coach Smith over at Utah State. I mean, when you're new, you're trying to establish it. Well, he's established it now. He's working to build it. So looking forward to seeing what they continue to do. And again, I'm biased, but when you know how hard this profession is, and you've been behind the lines, and you see the character that the staff has, the down to earth humility that they have, and then also they're recruiting high character players and doing it in a way that is a fun way to be able to support. So excited for Colorado State kind of getting that signature win. Had a little bit of back to earth yesterday, but there's going to be highs and lows, and Justin talked about it, and he's right on with having a young team. There's going to be highs and lows anyway with this COVID pandemic unpredictable season, but then there's also going to be that when you have younger players. But so exciting for what the future can bring for them, because it's going to get to a point where you're going to look around and say Isaiah Stevens, Dave Roddy, they're still here. I think JR talked about that when he came on. So you mentioned San Diego State. We haven't really dove into them as much yet. This team is the premier team in the conference. They still look like a top 25 team, although they're not in the top 25 rankings at this moment in time. They've had a really tough schedule, but they are really good and can beat you a lot of ways. I mean, Matt Mitchell is a player who everyone in the league is probably like, man, this guy's still here. You know, he started as a freshman, was on an NCAA tournament team there. Probably one of the winningest players. We have to look that up. Probably one of the winningest players in the school's history with as much as they've won since he's been there. So talk about San Diego State before we kind of jump into New Mexico, Utah State, and some of the other schools.
Yeah, well, I think the Saturday game was a bit of a reality check. To give up the lead of that nature, it's not something that's going to happen probably the rest of the season. That it's just kind of one of those fluky results, and I think that there is something to take away from that game a little bit. I think that defensively there are some things that need to be shored up, especially against a Colorado State team that just passes the ball really well. They have good scorers, good perimeter shooters. That is going to be a tough matchup for any team. So they responded nicely last night. I think it was a really good overall performance. I had my eyes on a lot of what these CSU individual players were doing, but I mean, I remember mentioning it, we have like 10 minutes left in the game, and I think to myself, like, SDSU played really well tonight. They look strong. Jordan Shackle had another phenomenal performance. It's just not a team that you can hold down very easily, because if Matt Mitchell isn't playing well, good chances are Jordan Shackle's hitting from the perimeter. If Jordan isn't playing well, good chance Tigo Gomez is hitting. There's just so many weapons. And, I mean, Nathan Mensah has been a revelation down low. He's been the player who a lot of us expected him that he would be. Just a really great interior presence. He gets on the glass. He can score around the paint, has a number of nifty moves. It's a great team overall. There's going to be weird results. It's just a weird season, but I think they responded really well last night. And as you mentioned, it's still a team that is right around that top 25. You hope for their sake and for their at-large hopes that they don't drop many more games like the ones that they did, but it's still overall a really strong team that can beat you in so many different ways and still is defending really well.
Yep, absolutely. Let's talk. You talked about some of the teams that may be able to possibly be in that next tier with San Diego State and Boise State and Utah State. So they're a back-to-back champion in this conference one way or another, whether it's regular season or postseason. They've done such a good job since Coach has been there. They also lose an NBA player in Sam Merrill, who got drafted and was an incredible player of the year in this conference. So talk about Utah State and their new jump and their series that they play, but also just their new jump in life without Sam Merrill.
Yeah, it was going to be a tough start for Utah State. I think everyone kind of acknowledged that. And even beyond Sam Merrill, I think a lot of people didn't realize how great of an on-ball defender Diogo Brito was last year. And he came up in some really big spots in the Mountain West tournament. Just a great overall defender. And even Abel Porter as well. He was the floor leader. He's a guy that should not be forgotten as a part of these last two Utah State teams. So you're replacing probably, your three most impactful guys. And I know people will mention Neemias Queta and Justin Bean, but that backcourt is almost completely new. And it started off a little rocky. Utah State had those really challenging games in South Dakota at Sioux Falls. And that was a tough schedule we mentioned this at the top of the show, to get the season started like they did. VCU, South Dakota State, Northern Iowa, BYU. It really doesn't get much more challenging than that to start a season, especially with mostly new faces. But I do think that they found their groove a little bit. 4-0 now in Mountain West play. And, San Jose State and Air Force are not necessarily the best teams in the conference, but I still think getting those footprints, getting everyone familiarized with what they're doing, that bodes well moving forward to kind of get this momentum and show that you can come up and win these games. And they've done it by huge margins. I mean, all of these games have been blowouts. But I think the most impressive thing for me is they've been able to put up huge scoring numbers, but you still, I don't think, have a guy who's averaging more than 13 a game. You have, I think, 4 or 5 players that are averaging right around 9 to 12 or 13 points a game. Justin Bean and Amias Queta have been really good. Freshman Raleigh Wooster has been really impactful as well. And Marco Anthony, the Virginia transfer, has come on and done a good job filling in that role. So it's a team that is now, instead of having Sam Merrill kind of build them out in spots, this team has a lot more balance. And I'm curious what they do in some of these close games. They had some early tests in November that didn't quite go their way, but they've looked really strong the last couple of weeks. And of course, you can mention kind of the strength of opponent there, but they still have delivered, and they've shown that they do have a good bit of balance and versatility. So I think they have some good tests coming up. San Diego State, Colorado State, those are going to be challenges, but it's a team that is looking far more promising now than they were, say, 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, 4 guys in double figures. No real guy averaging, an enormous amount. That's just kind of, you don't know which guy is going to lead the team in scoring on which night. And the leading scorer now may not be the leading scorer by the time the season ends, but definitely have some scoring. Not a Sam Merrill that's averaging 20 plus a game, but Marco Anthony, a guy who played in again in the national championship program at Virginia, Texas guy, another guy I'm really biased towards. Know him well, was able to recruit him and have a relationship with him. A guy who's always been known as a winner, a competitor, a winner. That's why Virginia signed him. He's averaging right at 13 and 5. But the thing he's doing that people probably didn't expect him to be able to do is shoot the three. I mean, he hasn't taken a bunch of them, but he's 8 of 20 at 40%, and one of the better 3-point shooters percentage-wise on the team. So they have another couple guys shooting. Brock Miller shooting over 40. Ashworth shooting over 40. Bairstow shooting over 40. So they still can shoot the basketball. They're 34 as a team, but not as explosive of a scoring team when you don't kind of have that one guy who really, really separates you. But again, they're another defensive team that's holding opponents under 40%. You kind of mentioned it. They haven't played the toughest part of the more challenging part of the Mountain West schedule yet, but they had a really tough road coming out of the gate, and I think this team will just continue to kind of get better. And similar to what we've talked about with other teams, I mean, you're just getting these new pieces in and figuring out everything that you have to do with losing a big-time player, once in a lifetime type of player in Sam Merrill, and then you're building this new chemistry. But it's not even like you get as many reps and opportunities with scrimmages and more practices. And, so the COVID season's definitely made some challenges for every team. But, this team is definitely one that looks like they're playing some of their best ball. And I think what it's about is, who's going to play their best ball at the right time. It's always like that in this league. You never know, because now it's back to a point where there is that top shelf team that looks like they're going to get in that large bid every year. It's been that way since Nevada with their bid. I want to take time to acknowledge one of our partners, Rising Coaches. Every coach wants to rise in their career in one way or another. We're all looking for professional development, access to tools, and relationships that can help us grow and help us advance in our career. Rising Coaches provides just that. You can visit Rising Coaches at www.risingcoaches.com. Their memberships are just $10 a month and provides a genuine community to help you grow and advance in your career. So, yeah, we're finishing up. We were talking about Utah State, and they're kind of getting hot these last few games. Let's talk about New Mexico. We haven't touched on that part of the league yet. Let's talk a little bit about the Lobos. Last time we had the show, Jeff was on the show. They hadn't played a game yet, or maybe they played one game. Now they've played some more games. What do you think about the Lobos before we kind of close out the show?
Yeah, they had a really big step up in terms of competition. They had their initial games were all canceled or postponed because of COVID-19. They didn't play their first game until December 13th. And as we recall, the season opened officially on November 25th. So it's been a challenge for them. They're playing their games in Lubbock, Texas right now. And coming out of the gates, playing 2 of the first 3 against non-D1 teams, and then jumping right into a series against Boise State and a series against Nevada. They lost all 4 of these matchups, but I do think that there are some positives that you can take away. I do think that this team will be a factor offensively. I think that they'll get better over time. Makwach Malawach, of course, being their senior leader, he's going to have to take the reins quite a bit, as we spoke with Jeff Grammer, and I think he's ready to do that. But some of these newcomers, it's, besides Malawach, you're starting 4 new guys. You have new guys off the bench. And it's just kind of like the perfect blend of a team that's going to take some time, as we mentioned quite a bit on this show, but it's just the truth of the matter there when you're bringing in mostly JUCO guys who are familiarizing themselves with D1 basketball. Jeremiah Francis, the North Carolina transfer, who we're just so glad he's healthy because he's had so many years where he's been banged up. He had those knee issues at North Carolina. He's going to be, I would imagine, one of the better point guards and lead guards in this conference, but just a challenging start for them. I do think that they'll get better, especially the defensive side too, because of just the overall strength and versatility and athleticism on this roster. There's a lot of that, even though these might not be the biggest names. So, I can only imagine what it's like for this coaching staff that's trying to make all these pieces work, and then also factor in that they're not even playing games in New Mexico. They're playing their home games technically in Lubbock, Texas, or wherever else they might be shipped off to, and then all the away games in this conference, which are never easy. So it's pretty much like an all away conference schedule. And when you have all these new players coming together, it's just going to be a matter of time before it comes together. But I like Paul Weir and his staff. I think they know what they're doing and they know the direction that they want to head. And I do think that, once they get past this stretch, they've got Utah State and UNLV. Those are 4 of the top maybe 6, 7 teams in this conference. That's a tough way to start any season. So they'll get some wins under their belt. It's just going to take some time, but I do like the long-term potential of this team because they just have so much talent and athleticism.
Yeah, their last series was against Nevada. Nevada was able to pull off the sweep. Let's talk about Nevada, a team that's they've had their spots in the season, started the year out with a win at Nebraska. Nebraska may not be as strong as maybe people thought they were, but still a great win. And Nevada's been able to get off to some good moments within the conference schedule of Mountain West. So talk a little bit about Nevada.
Yeah, Nevada's been they might be the team that's exceeded expectations the most for me this season versus what I was expecting. And they came off strong. They had that Nebraska win where they came up clutch at the end. That San Francisco loss, I think, is still kind of an anomaly, getting blown out by 25 against San Francisco. That team in USF has been delivering uppercuts to all of these really strong teams, beating Virginia and that. So I think you can kind of throw away that result as just one of those strange performances, a lot like what San Diego State did against CSU or what CSU did against St. Mary's. There's just going to be weird results early on, but I think overall Nevada's looked really strong and even better than expected. They're balanced on both sides of the ball. They have a lot of height. It's still a fairly new team with all of their senior losses last season, but Grant Sherfield, I think, far and away is the newcomer of the year so far in the conference. He's really delivered. Wichita State transfer, the guy from, of course, as you will know, another Texas guy in this league. But he has been delivering, in almost every facet of the game. He's scoring the basketball. He has one of the highest assist rates in the country. And even most importantly, defensively, he's been really good, playing passing lanes, getting steals, contesting shots. Just a really impressive performance from him so far. I like what he's done to kind of usher in this new era of Nevada basketball, so to speak, after all the years of, the Martin twins, Lindsey Drew, Nisre Zuzwa, those guys. To now have kind of that the steadiness at the guard position and also work along some of these guys like Desmond Cambridge, who is capable of hitting some big shots, and Trey Coleman, a freshman who has been really impactful. So I like Nevada. I think that the future is really bright for them, and they did lose that game against Air Force. That's kind of one of those challenging matchups that they have. Air Force can hit from the perimeter at times, but I think overall Nevada has shown that with their height and with some of their shot making and the leadership of Grant Sherfield, I think that this could wind up a lot like CSU, being a team that is really dangerous come March.
Yeah, dangerous indeed. You talked about Sherfield, another Texas guy, like you said. I'm biased, so those that listen, sorry for that, but this is what we do. We actually have a high school show about Texas. If you want to learn more about that on Wednesdays, we do have that inside high school hoops with some Texas scouts. But I say that to say Sherfield, the leader of the team, picking up a little bit where Harris left off as a big-time scorer, another Texas kid. But the cool thing about this story, and we may have mentioned it before, but he actually committed to Coach Alford at UCLA. Grant Sherfield was different than Isaiah Stevens. Grant Sherfield was kind of one of those guys early on in his career, freshman year, where he was a national name. He was a guy getting Kentucky offers and getting high-level offers and scored a ton of points as a freshman and was one of those guys who was really on the radar. So he commits to UCLA as an underclassman. And Coach Alford, obviously Coach Alford no longer there. He ends up they go separate ways. Coach Alford goes to Nevada after the season. The young fellow went to Wichita State, played some there, was not quite as good as he's playing now. So just happy for him, happy for them to get reunited. He's definitely one of the better guards in this conference, should be newcomer of the year to this point in the season, but shooting 43% from three, which you always guys that can make plays with the ball in their hand and make free throws and be able to shoot the three are always huge weapons. And like you said, his assist to turnover to this point, 30 more assists than turnovers at 59 assists and 29 turnovers, one of the better ones in the country, like you said. But Cambridge also another guy who's led them in scoring on nights. He's averaging right at 15. Zane Meeks is right at 10, and Warren Washington right at 9. So they have almost four guys right at double figures. Another team that can shoot the three. That's such a big weapon in college basketball. They're shooting 35% as a team. So, yeah, I really like what I've seen from Nevada in the sense of, not probably a team that gets talked about as much in this conference because they maybe don't have the Martin twins, or they don't have the same Nevada standard yet that Coach Musselman had created there. But Coach Alford knows this league as well as anybody. He was the Coach Musselman in a sense of this league in his own way when he was at New Mexico before he went to UCLA. That's why he was able to go to UCLA. So he knows this league. He knows what it takes to win in this league and build a competitive roster and a championship level team. So excited that he has some young players that he can kind of build with, like we talked about with Colorado State.
Yeah, it's a program that kind of felt, I don't know how you felt with Alford hired, but it kind of felt like over time it was just a matter of time before this thing works. And last year, a bit of a transition. I thought that they were very reliant on Jalen Harris, and rightfully so. He's just a phenomenal all-league guy, and who would have been a player of the year if there wasn't a guy named Malachi Flynn in this league. But the transition, I think, is probably going quicker than they might have imagined. I think that there are a lot of things that they can hang their hat on that they've accomplished so far. I still think that defensively, they probably have a little bit of work to do. Contesting shots on a nightly basis is going to be important. And I think, losing track of shooters at times could also be something that could be ironed out. But that's also the case with a lot of teams in this league. And pretty much every assistant we've spoken to on this show has said that, defense takes a little bit longer to get better at than offense. A lot of these guys can come in and get buckets, but it takes a collective unit, it takes all five guys on the floor to really, be strong defensively. And by no means is Nevada a poor defensive team. They're very much, in the mix as one of the better teams in the league. But I still think the shooting will always be there. Sherfield has proven that he can hit. Warren Washington's been a factor down low. They have a lot of capable scorers. So I do think that defensively, that will be one of the key factors for them as they move forward.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And really the only teams we haven't talked about, UNLV hasn't been able to play, so we won't dive as much into them and kind of talk more about them as they get playing back into action. But Air Force is the only team we haven't talked about yet in this conference. And then after we talk about Air Force, we'll talk about the NCAA tournament. We could have probably opened the show with that, but wanted to get straight to Mountain West and talk a little bit about the NCAA tournament and then some of the matchups that we see going forward in the Mountain West. that are good to keep an eye on. So before we get to that, let's talk about Air Force.
Yeah. I mean, Air Force has had a really tough draw as well. Nevada and Utah State in their first 2 series of the season. They were able to sneak out a win against Nevada on the road. I think that's a pretty big deal. And you have to remember that this is another team that lost their top 2 guys, Lavelle Scotty, Ryan Swan Ford, replacing those guys, let alone at a service academy with the first-year head coach. A lot of different things can be said about where Air Force is at, but they've still been able to pick up, 3 D1 victories already through 8 games, and I think that that's kind of a nice starting point for them. It's still a team that needs to get a lot better on the boards. I think that's going to be it's going to be a huge factor for Air Force just to get better on the boards, because they'll need to have some extra chances to score baskets. They don't necessarily have a bucket getter like Lavelle Scotty was last season. They do have some solid guards still, in Chris Joyce and AJ Walker. That's a pretty good duo. But I think maximizing possessions, especially when you play at one of the slowest tempos in the country, that's just a style that Joe Scott wants to implement. I think extra possessions can really go a long way. So, getting on the boards, on the offensive boards, being able to turn teams over and contest shots. I think the more you maximize your chances to score and prevent the other team from scoring, that's going to bode well for Air Force. So I think overall it's a young team. Nick Jackson has come on and been a really good surprise for them. But to start off this stretch, the 4 games that they had, I think to sneak out one is pretty nice. A lot of people didn't have Air Force very high up in their Mountain West preseason rankings. So Joe Scott will implement his system, and they'll get better over time. But I do think that maximizing possessions, taking good shots, and preventing opposing teams from taking good shots is going to be important for Air Force.
What did you see from Air Force before we move on and kind of close the show? What did you see from Air Force in that win against Nevada that maybe they can build on or duplicate that will allow them to kind of continue to have more wins like that?
Yeah, well, it was a resilient performance. They trailed by double digits. They're able to come back, which it seems to be a theme on this show. A lot of comebacks in the league so far, but to do that on the road in Reno, of course, we don't have the fans in the stands and such, but to come back from a double-digit deficit against a team that has Grant Sherfield, Desmond Cambridge, a lot of capable scorers, I think is a huge deal. And AJ Walker was the key in this one. He wound up with 27, can really hit from all 3 levels, and just did a good job leading this team as we expect him to. He's kind of their go-to guy. He, along with Chris Joyce, combining for 45 in this one. Just leading this team, hitting important baskets when they need them. It's a team that will have to come up in big spots, and they're going to have challenging circumstances. But to notch this win when they're trailing by double figures against a Nevada team that has been so successful in this league, I think that's a good win that they'll be able to keep in their back pocket and remember when they went up to Reno and was able to come back from double figures to win that game. So that's an important one. And I think if we see more of this competitive nature from Air Force, that they should be able to improve as the season goes along.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about as the season goes along, you mentioned. So the end of the season, we've mentioned the NCAA tournament. So in talking about the NCAA tournament, let me see if I can get a quick screen share by chance. We'll play a quick video if it'll allow me to. And we will just talk a little bit about, so we have one location. We finally have a location. We know we're going to have the NCAA tournament at. So that helps. And then I think all of us want to get to where we can start playing some games. Let me see. Okay, maybe my screen share is not going to work today, but I will play the audio for this if that will work. Let me see.
Have an NCAA.
Can you hear that, Eli?
No, I can't right now.
Let me see. Hold on. Hey, baby steps. We got a new computer so we can be able to do some of this cool stuff, but I haven't tested all of it out yet. So
Tournament, except it won't be anything like the
Can you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll start from the top. So this is Myron Metcalf from ESPN, just talking a minute 30 seconds about the NCAA tournament will be in in Indiana. at 6 different locations. So have the dates, have the locations. It will not be exactly a bubble, but we'll have some elements of the bubble. But we'll talk more about that. But play this quick video, and then we'll talk more about it.
We're going to have an NCAA tournament, except it won't be anything like the NCAA tournaments of the past. NCAA officials announced today that they will have an all-inclusive tournament, all 68 teams playing in one city, Indianapolis and the surrounding areas. It'll be unlike anything we've ever seen with the NCAA tournament, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, and this is just sort of what has to happen. NCAA officials said that they'll need more than 2,500 rooms to house all of the teams. They'll put them on separate floors in different hotels. The hotels will be connected to the convention center in Indianapolis, which will be a practice facility. You'll have multiple venues in Indianapolis, including Lucas Oil Stadium, but also as far as West Lafayette, where Purdue plays, Mackey Arena, Indiana, Assembly Hall. Those will also be host of games during this unique NCAA tournament. No word yet on whether or not we'll have fans, but family members of coaches and student athletes will be in attendance. Listen, this will be the greatest undertaking by a major sports organization during the pandemic. Yes, the NBA played in a bubble in Orlando. This is even bigger than that. And this is going to involve multiple areas around Indianapolis. But officials have put in a lot of work, had a lot of meetings about how to make this work, how to move forward in these unprecedented times. And it looks like we're going to have a tournament, which is not something we could say a year ago when that event was canceled.
Yeah, so wanted to just play that first to kind of set the tone for us being able to talk about this. But 6 different locations, 6 different venues for the event in the Indianapolis and surrounding areas. Like you said, you have Bankers Life Fieldhouse, which is where the Indiana Pacers play. You have Hinkle Fieldhouse, which is where Butler plays, which is in Indianapolis as well. You have Indiana Farmers Coliseum, which is where IUPUI plays in Indianapolis as well. He talked about Purdue kind of being a little bit further out, but using the Mackey Arena at Purdue, and then using Indiana's Assembly Hall are the 5 venues that will host games. So looking like, and Lucas Oil Stadium has 2 courts, but only 1 court will be played there. That is where the Indianapolis Colts play. So 6 different total host venues, 5 different basketball venues. Definitely, I mean, I'm impressed. I'm not surprised because it was such a big deal. They had to figure out someplace. It was already scheduled to be in Indiana, so some of the things probably lined up, but just being creative enough to figure out they can't quite do a bubble like the NBA did. Because you have to have multiple games going on at the same time for the NCAA tournament to really work. You can't have one after the other, kind of like they did in the bubble, but it's as bubble-like as you can get. And as Myron Metcalf stated, as big of a deal as you could possibly have in sports so far as putting together this type of event. So talk a little bit about your thoughts, Eli, when you hear about and read about, and think you wrote about some of it too.
Yeah, it's it is what you want to see. There needs to be a tournament this year for a lot of reasons. It's important for the coaches,
Eli,
the
you still
student
there?
athletes.
We can't hear you for some reason.
You got me?
Got you now.
Okay. So just pointing out that it's important for this tournament to happen for a variety of reasons. The coaches and the players and all the staffers who are involved in this sport, who live off of this sport, it's important for them, but it's also important for the NCAA. I mean, you lose a tournament last year, and that equates to about $1 billion in revenue for the NCAA. And they won't come out and say this, of course, but I mean, there are a lot of things that are at stake here to have this tournament and ensure that everyone is healthy and participating in it. So not a huge surprise. We've heard rumblings about this for a while now, and these are all great venues that have hosted some phenomenal matchups in the past. I'm curious to see how it all looks. I think my biggest question right now is what that first week of March and second week of March looks like, because in a standard year, we have the conference tournaments wind up finishing on that Saturday and the Sunday, brackets coming out Sunday evening, and then there's that quick turnaround for the playing games to be on Tuesday and Wednesday. And I just don't really see that timeline matching up this year. I think you have to ensure that everyone is safe and testing negative for COVID-19. when they arrive in Indianapolis, because you just cannot run into a situation where a team has a breakout and is unable to compete. It would just completely throw the whole tournament out of the window. So I would imagine that they've said that they're still going to keep it at 68 teams and that the Final Four dates will be the same. But I would imagine that there are some changes to what those first and second rounds look like, because there just needs to be more time for everyone to isolate, test negative, and then get the show on the road. But it's a good sign for us to have this tournament to cover and talk about, and it's a really good sign for everyone involved to kind of have that sense of comfort that this tournament will happen this year. And of course, college basketball is really the only sport that has been unable to crown a champion because of COVID-19, because that all wound up happening in mid-March, right when COVID-19 hit. So it's good to see. I'm glad the NCAA was proactive in this, and it's gonna be a crazy tournament. It'll be fun to see what happens.
Yeah, almost had it. Like you said, you had the NCAA had to figure out a way to make this happen. They did. Now it's the execution of it. But the plan looks like selection Sunday, March 14th. The first four is supposed to be March 16th and 17th. The first round, if I'm not mistaken, is the 18th and 19th. Second round, March 20th, 21st. Sweet 16, March 25th and 26th. Elite 8, 27, 28. And then the Final Four, April 3rd, and National Championship, April 5th, is what it looks like as of now. So, again, it's different style, different setup. The way that it's normally been, different regions, and the winner of the region all comes to one location. We're starting all in one location from the start, but we'll keep talking about this. I'm sure this won't be the last time we'll mention this, but great news yesterday to start the year, first full week of January, to just put it out there. We have a tournament, we have a location, we have a plan. Now it's just kind of putting everything in place. So I think it gives everybody kind of that vision too, as you start the second semester conference play. This is what we're playing for. So we're playing, your coaches can start talking to their teams. We're playing to go to Indianapolis. We know the setup. We know what it's going to be. So I think everybody kind of gets energized, because at the end of the day, that's what this whole thing is about, as far as being able to play in a tournament and making a run. That's what coaches have dreamed of since they have been working so hard behind the scenes. That's what players have grown up watching, one shining moment video and being able to play in that themselves. So awesome by the NCAA. I don't normally say that. I haven't said awesome by the NCAA a lot in my lifetime, but in this particular case, you got to give them credit for putting this together. And, again, you talked about it. They had to. They did. Let's talk back Mountain West before we close the show. We got to look forward. We've had some compelling, interesting highs and lows. You don't know who's going to beat who on any given swing. What do you see kind of going forward the next week, maybe even two of the Mountain West? And we do have some surprise that we'll put out in the morning about some of the things going on in the Mountain West. We'll sprinkle that in via Twitter. If you follow Eli, if you don't, then just you're missing out altogether anyway, because, how do you not follow the guy? The guy's the expert not only on the Mountain West, but showing his ability to cover the nation. But we'll put out some good stuff tomorrow. But what do you look forward to as far as the Mountain West?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how these 2-game series unfold. And you have pretty much every situation playing out so far. You have one team winning a game by a huge margin, and then, almost coming up short in the second game. We have blowouts in both games. We have competitive ones in both games. I'm curious to see if this trend of comebacks continue. We've seen a lot of teams who have come back from huge deficits. Colorado State has, Air Force has. A lot of these teams have been capable of making those runs, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the uncertainty of playing in these empty gyms. It's very much a level playing field as much as it can be, and I think it allows some of these teams to really show what they're made of. So it'll be a fun schedule moving forward. We have some good games the rest of the week. I'm looking forward to UNLV now getting back in action. It's been a month since they last played, so now having to go to Fort Collins and take on Colorado State, that's going to be a challenge now that CSU has kind of solidified themselves a little bit. But the number one series that I'm looking forward to is this Nevada-San Diego State series. And these two teams, they don't like each other much. And I know that the coach is different on the Nevada side and the players are different on both sides, but these fan bases are two of the more passionate ones in this league. And I think they both think that they're the best program in the conference, and there are plenty of reasons why they should believe that. But this will be a fun matchup for a lot of reasons, and I think guard play will be the thing to watch in this one. San Diego State, what they have in Mitchell on the wings, but also Shackle hitting from deep, Tico Gomez. And then on the Nevada side, we've spoken a lot about Grant Sherfield, Desmond Cambridge. It would be hard to find a game in the Mountain West that has 5 better players in that one. So I'm looking forward to that series. It will be played in Viejas. That's, I mean, even without fans, that's going to be a tough place to play. So I'm curious how that one winds up, whether SDSU is able to hold serve at home or whether Nevada is able to pick up an upset here or there. But a lot of fun things happening in this conference, and hopefully everyone will be back in the swing of things now that UNLV is back. But still, just a lot of things going on, weird results, kind of wacky headlines. It's going to be fun to cover regardless.
Yep, it always is. It always is. Well, thanks so much again for joining us. I believe this is episode 4. Yeah, episode 4. We'll have episode 5 in 2 weeks. Next week, similar time, we'll be having the Heat Check College Basketball Show, which we love that one because we get to cover the entire country. We got a quick comment. Former player trying to tell me that I can't hold him. Yeah, I won't embarrass you on the stream, but we'll talk. We know that's not true. And then we got Coach Mike Thomas. Thanks for having this. Yeah, thank you, Mike, for tuning in. We really appreciate the support. Having a lot of fun. Again, like I said, Heat Check will be next week. We'll talk about the entire country and the hot topics, and then we'll come back in 2 weeks and talk again about the Mountain West. We got one more comment from John Weisbrod. Great job. Again, we appreciate everybody tuning in. Had a lot of fun again, covering a lot. We hadn't been here in a while. It's good to be back, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, make sure to follow All Access Network on YouTube, subscribe, share, like. Same thing on our podcast, and same thing for Eli and all that he's doing at Heat Check CBB on Twitter. And you can also find him on Instagram as well. And podcast is
we got it on our website as well at heatcheckcbb.com.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll keep that going, and stay safe, wear masks, eat some good food. Again, continue to tell your loved ones you love them. We don't know what tomorrow brings, but in the meantime, we're going to enjoy some great college hoops, and be safe out there, everyone.